Can you imagine a world where there's boundless economic opportunity and new inventions all the time? Our next speaker can imagine that world, and he's going to tell us about it. He's the CEO of Mexico's Urban Development Corporation, Coordinator General of Economic Policy, and Chief of Staff of Mexico's Secretary of State. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Juan Enriquez.
So I'm involved in biotech, and I've been thinking about life code and things of that nature. And let's get the first slide up here. All right. Very good. Because this is early morning and because you probably don't want a highly technical lecture on genetics, which is what I do these days as a venture capitalist, I'm going to give you the bottom line, which is 3 simple ideas. And the first simple idea on this is that all wealth derives from code. The second idea is that code keeps evolving. And the third idea is that life code is going to become the largest single driver of the global economy going forward. Those sound like really odd ideas. Hopefully by the end of this it makes sense. But put yourself in a different context. If I'd been sitting here in, call it late 1970, and I told you the ability to code in ones and zeros is going to drive the global economy, you probably would have thought I was crazy. But today I'm telling you the ability to make apples or things out of apples is going to drive the global economy. So let's start with thesis number 1. Why is code the driver of knowledge? Because if you take the DNA that's in each of your cells, and each of your cells contains your entire DNA, so each of your cells is a diskette that holds all of your gene code. So you can make copies of you, not just by cloning yourself, but by taking the gene code out of one of your cells and making an identical you, or at least halfway identical, because half of its nature and half of its nurture. But let's say you take that gene code out, which is folded into a trillionth of an inch. It stretches out into about 6 feet. You lay the DNA of a human next to the DNA of a mouse, and the difference between a man and a mouse is about 5% of gene code. Most wives know that already. By the time you get to monkeys, difference between a man and a monkey is about 1.23% of gene code. That's why sometimes you get the congressional debates you get. But as you're thinking of this stuff and the implications of this, there are parrots that learn 1,000 words. There are whales that sing. There may be chimps that learn sign language. And the real difference between our species and other species, the only thing animals can't do that we do, is they code, and because they code, they transmit data, knowledge across time. No matter how you teach a parrot to sing or words, the grandchildren of that parrot are not going to learn what the great-grandparents learned and taught without physically being there. How do human beings start to code? Well, they do something that looks like this. There is no animal on this planet but a human being that will paint on a cave wall. And when you paint on a cave wall, you can say, look, this is how we have a baby. This is the kind of fish we eat. This is how we cook it. This is how we dress. These are the musical instruments we play. This is how we hunt. There's actually a lot of information in that picture that comes from Argentina 2,000 years ago. So we're learning a lot across time because they learned how to code knowledge. That's enough to generate a tribe, not an empire. An empire actually looks like this. So what the Egyptians have done here, which is really important, is they've made the code portable. You've put it on papyrus, you've put it on clay tablets. And because you've done that, this stuff can move. You don't have to go to the cave wall to learn. And because this stuff can move, and because everybody can read this simple declaration, The Egyptians are very smart, so this says Red Sox rule. Not this year, but there's always next year. But what's really important about being able to read this as Red Sox rule is that what this is telling you is, A, you've got a standard language that you can read in Upper and Lower Egypt, and B, you can move it from Egypt anywhere else. And that means that you can have history books, that means you can have holy books, that means you can have customs declarations, that means you can have due diligence on companies, that means you can have contracts, because the language, the code, has become portable and standard. Imagine if every time you wanted to learn something, you had to go to a different cave. That wouldn't work. So that's the difference between a tribe and an empire. Then, of course, what Europeans did is they collapsed this system from all these pictograms into 26 letters. And then they stuck it in movable type, and all of a sudden you had huge libraries of data, of knowledge, of stuff that could be transmitted and learned across time. So actually, when we go into any office, any school, there's a huge amount of accumulated data and knowledge on whether this company is a good company to work with, a bad company, what happened in history, what happened in sports, all of that because the code became simpler. What happened over the last 40 years is these three folks came up with the world's stupidest machine. And what they did is they took a quartz crystal and they attached basically a paper clip to it, and they created a machine that could do exactly two things. Current, no current. Light, no light. Yes, no, or 1, 0. They won the Nobel Prize for creating the first transistor, and they began to turn our lives upside down because we all started to speak a completely different language, and that's the language of ones and zeros. So if I take my little BlackBerry or cell phone and I send you a little text message, if you get the first line of code up there, it says, I love you. If I'm in a bad mood that day, I will send you the second line of code, and that says, I hate you. So the difference between green and purple is really big, right? Now, what's really important about this stuff is not only have I collapsed every word written and spoken in English into 2 letters instead of 26, but I've collapsed every word in Chinese, Aramaic, Cyrillic, Egyptian, every language on the planet, every word written and spoken is now in 2 letters. Oh, and by the way, every bit of music in every tonal scale is now in 2 letters. And so is every photograph. And so is every video, and so is every film. So you've collapsed a whole series of different alphabets, a chemical alphabet for photographs, an electrical tape alphabet for films or for videos, a whole series of musical instruments and pentagrams for music, and you've taken all that and you've put it in 2 letters. And in the measure that you do that, that's been the largest single driver of the global economy for the last 30 years. This is the rise of Silicon Valley, of Austin, Texas, of parts of Houston, of Korea, of Taiwan, of Singapore, of the second largest software producer in the world, India. This code really makes a difference. Now, as you start thinking about why we weren't using this code, it's because this is what 5 megabytes took in 1956. Let me put that in context. Pull out your cell phone, take 1 picture. You just used up $1 million worth of memory. Would you like to take a second picture, buy a second machine? Not very effective, but when you go into these exponential curves that Peter was talking about, things get very amusing. By 1996, this is the first computer able to perform 1 trillion calculations per second. Oh, by the way, this year you can put it in the side port of your computer. When you get curves that look like that, the language changes quickly to the point where about 96% of all data transmitted in the world today is transmitted in ones and zeros. It really matters if you learn this language. So what's the thesis that I want you to leave here today? And this is point number 2. If code matters, then thesis number 2 is life code really matters. Well, the argument that Watson and Crick started coming up with in 1953 is all life forms on this planet are coded in what they called a double helix. Think of this as a spiral staircase with a sugar phosphate backbone, and it's adenine, threonine, guanine, cytosine. That's a really aggressive thesis. What that's saying is that every life form on this planet is coded in 4 letters. Every pig, every sheep, every orange, every bacteria, every human being, and every politician are made of the same stuff. This is what a contemporary photograph of DNA looks like. It is an incredibly beautiful molecule. And if you stick that into machines that look like this, you can write incredibly boring books. These are gene sequencers, and they spit out thousands and thousands of pages of A, TCA, GAA. Now, why does that matter? Because that makes this thing an operating system for life, but you don't need to plug it in, and you don't need a Microsoft license. Yet. How does this execute code? It sits on a tree until it does this. And then it begins to go ATACAA, which means make a little root. TCGAA, make a little stem. GTCAA, make a series of leaves, make a series of flowers, and then make a couple more apples. Now go back to those ones and zeros. 11110, I love you. 001111, I hate you. The function fundamentally changes depending on the code. And if I take this code and I change a couple of little letters in it, this becomes a green apple. Or if I take an orange and change a couple of lines of code in that, an orange becomes a tangerine, or a grapefruit, or a lemon. See, very small changes in gene code really make a difference, and it turns out that all life, if you came to Sugarland to figure out the secret of life today, here it is. All life turns out to be in perfectly transmitted code. And that means that the difference between this creature and this creature is about 1 out of every 1,000 letters. Difference between you and the person sitting next to you, about 1 out of every 1,000 letters. Be a little more careful where you sit next time. This, of course, is what gives rise to evolution, right? There is definitive proof of evolution. Evolution is not merely a theory. We're just not quite sure which direction it's currently taking. How can such minute changes make such a huge difference in the outcome? Well, it's pretty simple, right? I mean, let's take it to English. This is the way that you see the world, but this particular organization has a slightly different way of seeing the world. They see the organization like this. By the way, that's the reason why you might get cancer and your brother or sister don't. Because even though you come from the same parents, there are minute genetic differences in the repeats, in the spacing, in single letters that may end up with you being healthy or sick because these small changes make a big difference. A lot of people have been really scared of things like cloning. Let's make cloning a little less scary. This is a modern gene cloning laboratory. It happens to be in Argentina. As you walk out after talking to these scientists, you meet this little cow that thinks it's a Labrador retriever. It comes up, waits to be petted. You're petting the cow. As you're petting the cow, these two guys show up. And at that point, you say to yourself, you know, self, those two look a lot alike. And in fact, they look a lot like that one. Indeed, they do. Because what scientists did is they took a cell out of the right ear of this cow, took the gene code out of that cell, inserted that gene code, new gene code, into that cell, and put that into a cow. And that looks like this. This is a vet, left hand way up the back of the cow, holding an ultrasound in the right hand, replacing 100 cloned embryos in the morning that I was taking these pictures. And that's why when you walk out on the Argentine Pampa, it turns out there's actually a lot of cows that look really similar. Because I did not expect to see this, I'm walking around taking pictures like a madman with my little digital camera until this friendly Argentine cowboy, a gaucho, shows up and says, "But Che, what are you doing? Why are you taking so many pictures? Can't you understand? They're all the same." This guy's more interesting. This is one of these cloned cows, but the same thing that happened to those little ones and zeros between I love you and I hate you, that happened with this cow in such a way that they changed the gene code so this cow produces a medicine used to treat cancer in its milk. And every time you clone this cow, it's the equivalent of a factory about this size. 20 of these cows substitute for that factory. Now, of course, no self-respecting American would ever allow him or herself to be treated by medicines grown in cloned cows' milk, which is the reason why Americans are using goats. 60 goats, Western Mass, producing a medicine that's FDA approved. There will be farmers that will be making goat cheese, and there will be farmers that will be caring for $1 million goats. Guess who's going to be rich and who's going to be poor? It's not just animals. Sex, of course, is about to get really weird. Right? We've already got all these IVF clinics, and that does stuff. I mean, look, your grandparents, there was exactly one way of getting pregnant. Now there's about 17. And growing. When you think about what this does, you're beginning to see advertisements like this for donor eggs, and you can pick PhDs, you can pick special talents, you can do a whole series of things, and this isn't exactly out of the mainstream. This is an advertisement, if you look at the bottom, from the American Airlines magazine. Then you get things like this. What this gobbledygook book says is you can freeze stuff, and you can freeze it over time, which means that you can have a child 10 months from now, 10 years from now, or maybe 100 years from now. You can also time shift in a different way. This is Maria del Carmen Busada, who had twins at 67. And then things really do start getting weird, because you start getting articles like this. And what this means is you can fertilize eggs without the need of sperm. Men have become, or are becoming, useless. Not news. Then you get stuff that looks like this. This is a mouse stem cell. You can take a mouse skin cell, turn it into a mouse stem cell, and as of last month, you can grow a full mouse out of that. Which means, in theory, you could take one of your skin cells, turn it into a stem cell, and clone yourself. By the way, these are all pictures because I'm not talking about the future. I'm a historian. I'm telling you what's already happened. This hasn't happened yet, but Penn State is working on mammoths. And as you go forward, you begin to think about what does it mean not just to make whole bodies, but parts of bodies. So you can take a salamander, cut off an arm, cut off a leg, it regrows, freeze the heart, half the heart, it regrows. Cut off a limb, it regrows. If you can do that with salamanders, you can do it with chickens. You can grow 3 wings on chickens. If you can grow 3 wings on chickens, then you can grow body parts, not just wings, but hearts. So as of 6 months ago, you can take all of the cells off a mouse heart, spray paint stem cells onto a mouse heart, the heart cells organize, and the heart starts to beat. Practical implications of this is going to change every industry on the planet. It's going to be the biggest single driver of the global economy. We're already seeing this, turning plants into fuels, plants into plastics, bacteria into factories that produce biodegradable plastics, which is leading small startups like DuPont to make all its new tennis shoes and rugs and the breathable clothing that you make in a factory in Tennessee out of bacteria. Last point. This is a programmable cell. It's a company we founded. You take the DNA out, insert new DNA, the cell becomes a different species. Last January, we created the largest organic molecule ever created in human history. We programmed this. That means cells become programmable as chips become programmable. Here's the big deal. And again, practical implications. You can begin to program things like algae to make fuel. And that led a little local Texan startup called Exxon to sign a $600 million deal with a company that's 2.5 years old, called synthetic genomics, to program cells to make fuels. You take sunlight, you take CO2, you make a fuel.
Thank you, Juan. Yeah, so your argument is very compelling that the life code is the new digital code in terms of driving the global economy in the future. But it feels to me like with the digital code, people know what to invest in and where it's going, because it's all going faster, smaller, cheaper, and companies come out that can offer new things to people. But with the life code, it seems like things are going in many different directions, and you showed so many examples of biological progress that are going off in different directions. So where do you see people knowing where to invest in this, or how to ride on that global economy?
So as a venture capitalist, I've invented more ways of losing money than any of you could conceive of. You actually get really good at it if you back startups. And that's a really interesting question, because right now we think, well, it's a no-brainer to have invested in digital code, but of course when digital code started, if you bought the machines that Gates was programming in the dorm at Cabot House at Harvard, you would have bought Altair stock and you'd be broke. And then you would have bought Tandy 2, and then you would have bought Commodore 64, and then you would have bought the standard for all Fortune 500 Wang word processing. Then you would have invested in the best technology. You would have bought early into Apple. Not a good idea. But if you'd reached the conclusion this digital world is a sinkhole, it doesn't increase productivity, and you lose money, then you would have missed the largest single revolution in history and probably most of the wealth creation. Similar things happening in gene code. Right? There's a whole pile of gene code companies out there. Most of them are going to tank. But some of them are going to become the world's biggest companies, and if you're going to double the GNP of the United States, you better do it through things like venture capital. Because it's 0.02% of US GDP invested, it's 17.8% of US economic output in the form of the Googles and the eBays and all of the things that have been growing up around the ability to code in digits. But now we're transitioning, and every industry in this world is going to change because we can read and write life code.
Thank you so much, Juan.
Thank you.